Scientific research is underway to better understand Vermont's black bear population, estimated at between 6,800 and 8,000. Bears are found in most communities in Vermont except the Champlain Islands. Even with increased hunting in recent years, the population is showing signs of growth, according to the Fish and Wildlife Department. So biologists spent the winter looking at the animal's reproduction and what factors are contributing to it, like the availability of food and how bears are moving from the Green Mountains closer to the Connecticut River, where there are more food options. Biologists collared nearly 20 mother bears, visited their dens, tranquilized them while they checked on the health of their babies, and will follow those animals for several years to see how they're doing, and they'll use this information to track and predict trends. We talked with bear biologist Nicole Dicken from the Fish and Wildlife Department.
We started this reproduction study because there's been a recent increase in the black bear population in Vermont, and we want to understand really what's driving that and if it's potentially related to food availability, because bears have been expanding into areas that they weren't previously, into the Connecticut River Valley, and there's different food sources available there, then that can impact their reproductive output. And obviously, if you're trying to understand a population increase, the first logical place to look is at their reproduction.
I guess I would have thought that you would have had this species quite well understood by now.
You know, the more I study bears, the more I realize we'll never really fully understand them. They're so complex and they adapt really quickly. So things that we thought we had down pat, that we understood about them, as the environment's changing, as it's becoming more developed, or like completely changing our understanding of what's bear habitat, what does regular bear behavior look like. So these things are always changing, but a lot of times we standardize across regions. So we're like, okay, if we know what the reproductive output looks like in another New England state, we can assume it would be similar here. Those assumptions, if we can avoid them, that's ideal. You know, Vermont's different than New Hampshire, is different than Maine. We've had studies on bears in Vermont, and they've had collared bears, but they weren't directly assessing reproduction. They were looking at other factors. That's the primary objective of this study.
And what are some of the specific questions you hope to answer through this?
A lot of the data points we can get can help us improve our population model. So actually estimating what a population size is of any species, it's pretty complex. It's a lot of statistics. And so the more data we can input into those models, the more accurate they can be. And that can just help us understand what we're really looking at. But we want to look at cub survival. How many cubs are they having on average? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it more? How many of those are surviving until their first year? So the survival rate. Also the sex ratio of the litters, what age they're having their first litter. So that can change. Sometimes when there are really abundant food sources, bears start giving birth younger than they would traditionally. And also what that inter-litter interval is, so the time between cubs. So bears usually have cubs once they start reproducing every other year. So we want to see, is that also the case here? And all of those can feed into that population model in the end. But what we really want to look at is, are those metrics different across these two study areas we have? Are those metrics different in the Green Mountains compared to the Connecticut River Valley, to see if the food sources that they have in the river valley might be influencing their reproduction. Because sometimes if there's abundant food, they can support more cubs. They start having cubs younger, and sometimes those cubs are surviving at a higher rate.
Take me through what visiting a bear den entails.
Bear den work is very dynamic and variable. No den is the same. We collar them in the summer, and then those collars take points every 5 hours. And we really are just using those collars to then locate the dens that they go into in the winter. If it's a long hike, we'll hike most of the way in. And before we're close to the den, we'll stop and we'll get all of the immobilizing drugs loaded. Usually we'll load both. We have a CO2 powered dart pistol, and we have a syringe pole, which is what it sounds like. It's literally a pole with a syringe on the end. Once that's loaded, only 1 or 2 people will actually approach the den at first, to try and minimize disturbance. You know, we don't want to make her go on alert or potentially run. And so I'm usually the one that will approach the entrance that I've already sort of located from that scouting event with a headlamp, and I'll shine a light in there and kind of see where she is, how she's positioned, what the best way to immobilize her will be. And then I'll either dart her or use the syringe pole. And then I back out and wait about 10 minutes and wait for the drug to take its effects. And then I'll check in on her and see if she's ready to be processed. And if she is, then yeah, essentially I crawl into the den with her, whatever that might be, and I just make sure, first things first, I make sure she's stable and check her vitals and make sure that she's reacting appropriately to the drugs. And then I'll pass the cubs out to the team outside. And once she is down, that's when we can bring the rest of our team in to the den site to be ready to help process. And once we pass the cubs out, they're kind of at an age where they're not quite ready to regulate their own body temperature, so they need help staying warm once they're out. So we'll wrap them in a blanket and put them in our jackets to keep them warm, which is a tough job for our staff, obviously. Any measurements that we missed in the summer, I'll get those and just keep monitoring her vitals. And then the team outside will be taking some measurements from the cubs. We get a weight, we identify the sex, and then we do some hair measurements and look at the tooth eruption to see kind of how old they are and get a sense of when they might have been born. Once that's all completed, we put the cubs back with mom, and then we back off, and that's pretty much it.
This is a multi-year study?
4 to 6 years. So it's got to be longer term because bears only give birth every other year. So if we want to look at one bear for multiple births, it's quite a few years we got to look at. And also food availability. There's cycles of food. And sometimes the bears will actually sync their reproduction with that cycle. So to capture all that variability and make sure we don't have any biases in our data, we want to have it for 4 to 6 years.
What steps did you take to ensure that this was all done safely, not just for you and your coworkers, but also safe for the animals?
We are using methods that have been used for decades, and they are used pretty much in every state that has black bears. For every 5 to 10 minutes, I take a heart rate, a respiration count, and I look at blood oxygenation as well. Make sure that she's responding. We give supplemental oxygen if there's any issues. We have steps we can take if she's reacting poorly. But these drugs are have a what we call a high therapeutic index. So even if we're a little off with the dosage, it's still very safe for her. And I know some people are concerned about potential transfer into the breast milk. The low amount that does get into the breast milk is not getting absorbed much once it's entering the cubs orally. It really has to go into the bloodstream. It would diminish our research and the whole point of what we're doing if we weren't making sure that what we were doing was safe for the cubs and for the mother.
Your team shared some pretty interesting audio.
That's actually one of the ways that we can help locate the dens. Sometimes we don't know if she's going to have cubs or not. We don't know if she's really young, if she's going to have them, or sometimes they just didn't gain enough fat in the fall to produce cubs. So we can approach, and sometimes I'll hear that kind of nursing sound, that churning, and it's almost identical function to a cat purr. It's that contentment and feeling safe. And so usually when they're having a nice meal from mom, they'll be making that noise.
Your department has done a really good job of messaging to the public ways that we can all reduce our negative encounters with bears, like, for example, not feeding our dogs on the back steps or the back porch, taking down bird feeders when it's time, not leaving our garbage out, things like that. Is there any knowledge that will be gleaned from this research you're doing that will help humans and bears coexist better in Vermont?
Kind of would be a byproduct of the study. We're more trying to just get baseline reproductive data right now. But if we are seeing that in the valleys they're having higher reproductive output, or we're seeing that certain regions with certain foods are leading to more cubs being born or higher survival rates, we can use that to kind of predict where hot spots might come up or where bears might start popping up that they haven't yet, which is we're running out of spots where bears haven't been popping up yet. But to just target new communities to then try and get that information out and educate them on how to coexist with bears. And just better understanding what's driving the population increase just helps us inform our population management better, to make sure that we are keeping that balance between people and bears. Their primary food source, especially in the Green Mountains, beech nuts, There's a couple diseases plaguing beech trees right now. It's uncertain what the future of beech trees in Vermont is going to be. So they might be losing a major food source. It might lead to an increase in conflict. They might just adapt to some new food source we haven't identified yet. So it'll help us predict future trends.
If you're looking for a volunteer next winter to help snuggle a bear, keep him warm, you know where to find me.
Yeah. So even when they're that young, they have really sharp claws, and they kind of treat you like a tree sometimes, and they'll try and like claw up to get to your neck or something, so you can get scratched up a little bit from the cubs.
A risk I'd be willing to take.